Firstly, thank you to the Europeana Foundation for inviting me to take part in this year's conference. I may be familiar to some of you here, but for those who don't know me, my name's Dean Birkett and I'm a freelance user experience designer and accessibility consultant based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. From 2009 to 2015, I was the user experience designer at Europeana. Since then, I've worked for a company that designs apps for non-verbal people, and I've provided accessibility consultancy to KLM and Air France. Now, I'm helping eBay to make their design system as rigid as possible, to ensure that as many people as possible are included in their designs. Before I jump into the talk, I just want to say that it's timely to be able to talk about a topic that's like this right now. The pandemic has changed so many things, but this is especially impactful to those that are most vulnerable. So today I'd like to give a brief introduction into accessibility, to frame how I think about it, and to share some of the common barriers that you may want to look out for. But first, I want to frame this talk a little more by touching upon these three words that you see on screen here: diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. In broad terms, diversity is any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. It means respect for and appreciation of differences in ethnicity, gender, age, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, education, and religion. Inclusion is a state of being valued, respected, and supported. It's about focusing on the needs of every individual and ensuring the right conditions are in place for each person to achieve their full potential. As Jutta from the Inclusive Design Research Centre says, diversity is our world's greatest asset, and inclusion is our biggest challenge. And finally, accessibility. Accessibility is about ensuring that the things that we design, whether products, services, devices, or environments, are accessible by people regardless of disability. As Microsoft say in their Inclusive Toolkit, accessibility is an attribute, while inclusive design is a method. And practicing inclusive design should make your products more accessible. It's not a process for meeting all accessibility standards. Ideally, accessibility and inclusive design work together to make experiences that are not only compliant with standards, but truly usable and open to all. So in short, diversity is the mix, inclusion is getting the mix to work well together, and accessibility is an ingredient to the mix. In the broadest sense, accessibility includes the design of physical products or devices, such as historic products which were created for people with disabilities, such as the typewriter or the telephone. Or a more modern example would be the OXO potato peeler, which is on screen, a device created by an inventor for his wife who suffered from severe arthritis in her hands. Accessibility includes services such as voice, SMS, or email, which were all created to solve an accessibility need. In 1972, the first email protocols were programmed by Vint Cerf, so he could communicate with his deaf wife while he was at work. And in 2006, Google Maps introduced turn-by-turn directions to help blind people navigate. And accessibility can refer to physical environments or spaces. Dropped curbs were designed so people in wheelchairs could easily traverse through the streets. This simple design also benefits people with pushchairs, luggage, a person on a bike. But as we work primarily with screens, then the talk today is going to be about digital accessibility and what we can do to ensure that our digital products include as many people as possible. Including people is something that Apple do so well, so I'd just like to play you this short clip.
People think that having a disability is a barrier. But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family.
One face, small face, focus lock.
And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
On screen is a photograph of Sadie smiling at her graduation ceremony. I was fortunate enough to attend her graduation party a few years ago, and she uses an app that I worked on that helps non-verbal people to better communicate. There are two things that I really like about Sadie's story. Firstly, her course was entirely online, and some of her fellow classmates were unaware of her disability. She was judged purely on her work, not on her disability. The other thing that I like about the video is that it was entirely done by Sadie. There's no camera trickery. Apple's tools are made to include people and not to exclude. This, in a nutshell, is digital accessibility. And that should be the goal of our digital products too. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, said right at the start, the power in the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. But accessibility is difficult and expensive. It means diluting my vision just to benefit a tiny niche group. I hear this all of the time, so if you're new to the topic, you may recognise some of the things here. But hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll have a different view. The World Bank estimates that there are 1 billion people on the planet with disabilities. 1 billion. That's 15% of the world's population, which is a huge amount of people that you could be potentially locking out of your site or product. 1 billion is not an edge case. 1 billion is not a tiny niche market. People with disabilities are in fact the world's largest minority. And those 1 billion people have a global combined disposable income of 996 billion US dollars, which I'm sure you'll agree is no small change. And although paid revenue from the consumer may not be your organisation's biggest concern, perhaps saving money may be. Considering accessibility early in the process prevents rework. Sadly, from experience, many companies think about accessibility way too late in the process. It should be something that we think about before a pencil hits a piece of paper. Research from the IBM Systems Science Institute said the cost of fixing a bug during the maintenance phase of a product is estimated to be 100 times larger than during implementation. Thus, thinking about accessibility saves the business both time and money. Having an accessible website will also prevent lawsuits. Although the figures on screen are very US-centric, it's worth noting the sharp increase over the previous years. In 2015, there were 57 cases, and in 2018, there were 2,258. In the EU, the Web Accessibility Directive is already in force, and the European Accessibility Act will come into force in 2025, which will affect banking and transportation, but also any website that sells products online. And being accessible increases brand perception. It results in quicker, better coded websites and can also improve SEO. Also, disability isn't just black and white, as Microsoft point out in their excellent toolkit. You can break an arm and not have the same ability to do something without a broken arm. Impairments can be permanent, temporary, or situational. And as I record this, I actually have an ear infection, which is a temporary impairment. Things such as the volume control on my TV and captions are helping me at this time. These situations on screen will be recognisable to anybody, so remind anybody who questions the value of accessibility that this is just as much about them as it is about anybody else. You can be born with a disability or acquire one through illness, accident, or events such as war or natural disaster. The image on screen is from the Haiti earthquake, where thousands of the 300,000 injured people have been left with permanent disabilities. There's simply no escaping that people with disabilities are part of our human diversity. More commonly, the likelihood of being affected by disability can simply come from getting older. We're now living longer, which is great. But as we age, the likelier it gets that we'll face one form of disability or other. In 2009, 23% of people who live in Japan were 65 and over. By 2030, 1 in 3 people will be over 65, and 1 in 5 people over 75. This is not just in Japan. In fact, this old quote from Henry Viscardi is perhaps even more true today than when he said it. There are no disabled people. We're all just temporarily abled. In countries with life expectancies of over 70 years of age, people spend just over 11% of their lifespan living with a disability. On screen is an image of a person in a wheelchair who is blocked by some stairs in front of them. Looking at this, you could say one of two things. Because the person is in a wheelchair, they're unable to go up the stairs. Or because of the stairs, the person in a wheelchair is unable to go up. The wheelchair doesn't make the building inaccessible. The stairs do. The architects did not account for all the ways that people would interact with this building. The first description is the medical model of disability, and the second is the social model of disability. Hugh Herr, a biophysicist at MIT, describes the social model perfectly. Humans are not disabled. A person can never be broken. Our built environments, our technologies are broken and disabled. And as people who build digital products, we can't, nor shouldn't, aim to fix people. But we can fix environments, we can fix technologies, and we can certainly fix our digital products. Often when I talk about accessibility, people immediately start thinking about things like this. On screen are many words in a cloud, such as blindness, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, dyslexia. And they think about these conditions and then freeze. But we don't design for medical conditions, we design to prevent barriers. For instance, Parkinson's and dyspraxia have nothing medically in common, but they have the same barrier, which is tiny interface elements. So if your designers remove that barrier, then you enable more people to use your product. And if you make your interface elements less fiddly and more tappable, then that will benefit a wide range of other people too. To give you an idea of what I mean, I'd just like to share this usability test. The participant here uses their tongue on an iPad screen to navigate. So the barrier for this participant wasn't the fact that they have cerebral palsy, but because Apple have such a long list of settings. The designers could perhaps have a look at that list of settings and see if they could better sort it. And if they do that, it wouldn't only benefit a person with cerebral palsy, it would benefit everybody. And benefiting everybody is a good goal for us to all have, right? As people who create digital products, we're in a very privileged position to be able to help. In fact, it's our responsibility to help. This tweet went viral a few months ago. It says, Today my dad cried over the phone. He wanted 1 week where he could use his computer without my help. He's blind. Each inaccessible website tells him you aren't welcome in this world. If you don't know whether your website or app is accessible, it's not. By now you've hopefully got a good idea as to why it's important. So I'd like to next share the 4 most common types of impairments that people should think about when building digital products. We need to consider people with vision impairments, such as colour vision deficiencies, low vision, blindness. Motor impairments, such as difficulty or inability to use the hands, tremors, limited fine motor control. Hearing impairments, such as deafness or hard of hearing. And cognitive impairments, which could relate to memory, attention, or be developmental issues or anxiety or panic disorders. But there are others to consider, such as vestibular disorders, where the person using your site may feel nauseous because of animation or effects on screen. And speech impairments, such as someone with a stutter or someone unable to speak at all. This is not going to be a technical talk, so I'm not going to talk about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but I do want to state that there are guidelines that exist and we should adhere to. Your developers should be familiar with these guidelines, but it's also useful for UXers and product owners to have some understanding of them. Many companies who consider accessibility may just use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and think that their job is done. But conformity to guidelines is not the same as providing a good user experience. And so I recommend that you go through the guidelines, but never forget that we're designing solutions for people and not checking off checklists. In my workshops, we go through different types of impairments and the barriers that people with these impairments may face when interacting with our websites. I introduce personas such as Carol, who struggles with small text and contrast. Leah, who interacts with websites primarily by only using her keyboard. And Stephen, who is deaf. As companies adapt to the global pandemic, we need to ensure that these people are still included and the gap in digital inclusion does not widen. And through these personas, I introduce some of the barriers that they may face, such as vision impairments. When we talk about vision impairments, we're primarily talking about barriers such as colour vision deficiencies, which is the appropriate and more accurate term for colour blindness. Colour vision deficiencies affect quite a lot of people, primarily males. 1 in 100 will have a form called protanopia. Another 1 in 100 males will have a form called deuteranopia. Deuteranomally, which is shown second on this screen, affects approximately 6% of males, and it makes their greens much weaker. So perhaps you'll be able to see how the colour filter on the classic Europeana site may be problematic for people with colour vision deficiencies. Here, visitors to the website are shown squares with different colours in them to help them filter the content. On the left of the screen is the unedited image, and on the right is how it may appear to someone with a colour vision deficiency. Around 6% of males would experience something similar to what you see on the right-hand side of the page. There's no doubt that it creates a lessened experience on Europeana, but for e-commerce sites such as Nike, where the colours of the trainers are extremely important, this is a big problem. On the unedited screen, you can see the red and green on the left, whereas on the right, you'll see they're much harder to see. Fortunately, Europeana's new website introduces labels. And although hex values are still going to create barriers, this little change may have a huge impact on some people. Colour alone should not signify meaning. It needs something else to support it. And like Europeana, in Apple's case, they use a text label. Trello uses patterns if you turn on their colourblind friendly mode. And Spotify introduced a shape to show when an option was on. The first image shows how Spotify was for users before they introduced the improvement, where they just relied on colour alone to show that the loop was selected. On the improved version, they introduced a dot underneath the icon, which makes it much easier for people with colour vision deficiencies. Another issue that creates huge barriers for people with vision impairments is having text over an image. This example does not only fail all contrast checks, but it also creates a poor experience for anybody using the site. The storytelling element here is lost in the design. This could be improved perhaps by introducing overlays. This makes the text much easier to read, but it also takes away a lot from the image. So for the Van Gogh example, perhaps this is not suitable. It may be acceptable for decorative images though. For images that are meant to invoke a reaction or enhance the experience, then the best approach would be what you see here on the MoMA website. They clearly split the image and the text. This makes it much easier for anybody to read. One of the simulations that I do in my in-person workshops is to ask somebody to use these Cambridge simulation glasses and tell me what they see on screen. The glasses differ in strength and provide insight into the effects of vision loss. What these glasses can show us are various experiences that some of our visitors may experience when visiting our site. On screen is a blurry image of the Tate Modern website. Despite the blurriness, you can see what site we're on, the images are fairly clear, and some of the links may be readable. It is clear though that there are some areas which are much more difficult to read than others. After the age of 40, our eyesight will start to deteriorate, if it hasn't already, so we'll likely have to start using glasses to help correct our vision. If you increase the capacity lost, then it becomes much trickier. Here's the Tate Modern again. The visitor here may only just make out the sides and some of the images. They'd likely use strong glasses and maybe increase the font size to make it more readable. Or in some cases, they may even use screen magnification. And now here's a very blurred image. At this level, glasses, zoom, or magnification are not going to help. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with screen readers, but they do what you may imagine. They read out loud what is on the screen. They also allow the person operating it to use keyboard shortcuts to perform particular actions like jumping to sections on a page and reading out links or headings. The next examples that I'm going to show highlight some of the barriers that screen reader users face when visiting our sites. Alternative text allows screen reader users to understand what an image is on page. It also benefits people with slow connections who do not automatically load images on page load. Medium is a beautiful looking website, but let's find out how a screen reader user will experience this site.
Heading Level 4. User Experience Perspective. User experience isn't exclusively reserved for UX designers, as the best user experience processes involve people with various backgrounds. The power of persuasion plays a big role in the UX designer skill set. /0*P4X5Child_3B1JDJPG image. You are currently on an image.
So I'm happy to say that although it took 5 years, Medium finally allowed content creators to add alternative text to their images. People can now finally understand what an image is on page, as long as the content creator remembers to add the alternative text, of course. You may not be the one tasked with adding alt text to the images, but you can certainly educate your content creators and help improve the experience of people using screen readers by removing useless words and describe the most important thing at the start. So in this instance, National Library of the Netherlands interior is much more beneficial than a photograph of the inside of the National Library of the Netherlands. If someone was using a Braille reader, which is the sort of device that this deaf-blind person would use, they'd have to refresh the display after a certain amount of characters. So it's always better to be clear and concise and get to the point as quickly as possible. Now let's take a look at the PayPal website and see what we find here.
Link. Learn more. Make link. Learn more. Link. Learn more. Link. Learn more.
Painful, right? What PayPal could have done here would have been to create better links for individuals, for businesses, and so on, rather than this rather generic learn more. I spent some time working at KLM and ran into this issue throughout their website. On screen you'll see numerous edit and delete buttons without any context as to what you're going to edit or delete. KLM wanted to visually display these labels but announce something differently, which is what Simply Accessible do on their website. So if your website has multiple repeat actionable elements, then make sure you speak to the developer to explain the behavior that you expect.
Link. 7 solutions for creating more accessible SVGs. Read this article.
For some people, using a mouse is not possible. So for desktop sites, they rely on a keyboard as their only source of input, tabbing through actionable elements on the page, such as buttons or form controls. To help them to see where they're on a page, we use focus states. On the British Newspaper Archive website, you'll see a blue border appear and disappear with some buttons or links not highlighted, which makes it difficult and an inconsistent experience for certain people. Contrast that to how Swiss have designed their focus states. You don't need to go as far as what Swiss have done here, but at least make it sure that people who use a keyboard as their input can always see where they are on the screen. Alongside the styling, you also need to ensure that you can reach everything that you could interact with the mouse with the keyboard. I'm just going to play this short clip from Booking.com. Take a look at the focus state, which shows the area that is currently operable. So I don't know if you're able to follow that, but I was unable to reach the check-in date. Blind screen reader users like Bart Simons will also likely use a keyboard as their input device. And as he says, hotel websites are often inaccessible, so I did all of my bookings at Booking.com, but it became inaccessible too. He was unable to perform the primary goal of the website. And this problem here could have easily been prevented by simply unplugging the mouse and just using the keyboard to navigate the website. So there are many, many, many more examples and issues that people face when interacting with our digital products. But in the interest of time, I'd just like to wrap up by sharing how I approach design challenges, which may help the designers in the call. By asking myself, who have I excluded with my design? This can really help me see if there are other decisions that can be made that can include more people. And never forget that we're designing for people, and we need to include people and the right people to get the right results. So if you truly want to build accessible products, then you need to include people with disabilities in the process. As Wendy Chisholm of Microsoft says, I encourage you to fail in interacting with people with disabilities, because you will learn a bunch. You will learn what not to say and what people care about. You'll learn where the obstacles are, both the designed physical barriers and the constructed emotional ones that exist within yourself. As the title says, this was an introduction to accessibility. There's a lot more to know. And if you're interested in finding more about this topic or want to know how I can help your organisation, then please check out my website, deanbirkett.name, or connect with me on social media. Thanks for your time.